A devoted mother and her two young children were ambushed in their own home by her vengeful ex-husband, who had planned their execution with chilling precision, leaving the small community of Riverside County stunned and heartbroken. But 18 months later, when detectives finally pieced together the surveillance footage from that horrific night, they discover something that defies all logic and changes everything they thought they knew about what really happened in that house. Rachel Martinez had always believed in second chances. At 32 years old, she worked as a registered nurse at Riverside General Hospital, where her colleagues knew her as someone who never gave up on her patients, no matter how dire their condition appeared. Her warm brown eyes and infectious smile had a way of bringing comfort to families during their darkest hours. But Rachel's own life had been far from the peaceful existence she provided others. For 7 years she had been trapped in a marriage that slowly consumed her spirit. David Fletcher, her ex-husband, was a man who wore charm like a mask in public, but revealed his true nature behind closed doors. What began as subtle control gradually escalated into verbal abuse, financial manipulation, and eventually physical violence. David worked as a security supervisor at a local manufacturing plant, a position that fed his need for authority and control. He used his knowledge of surveillance systems and security protocols in ways that would later prove terrifying. Rachel's breaking point came on a cold February evening, when David's rage exploded over something as simple as dinner being served 15 minutes late. In front of their two children, 8-year-old Sophia and 6-year-old Carlos, he grabbed Rachel by the throat and slammed her against the kitchen wall. The fear in her children's eyes that night gave her the courage she needed to finally leave. The divorce proceedings were brutal. David fought every single detail, from custody arrangements to the division of their modest assets. He hired an aggressive attorney and dragged the process out for nearly 2 years, draining Rachel's savings and emotional reserves. During depositions, his lawyer painted Rachel as an unstable mother who was turning the children against their father. But the judge saw through David's manipulation tactics, especially after reviewing the medical records documenting Rachel's injuries over the years. When the final decree was signed, David was granted supervised visitation rights every other weekend, a decision that sent him into a fury. Outside the courthouse, he cornered Rachel in the parking lot and whispered words that still haunted her months later. "You think you can just throw away our family? You think you can replace me? I will never let you be happy with someone else." That someone else was Antonio Valdez, a construction foreman Rachel had met at the hospital when he came in for treatment after a workplace accident. Antonio was everything David was not: gentle, patient, and genuinely kind to her children. He had immigrated from El Salvador as a teenager and built a successful construction business through hard work and determination. When Sophia had nightmares about her father, Antonio would sit by her bedside and read her favorite books until she fell asleep. When Carlos struggled with math homework, Antonio patiently worked through problems with him for hours. Rachel and Antonio had been together for 8 months when they decided to move in together. They found a small but comfortable house on Oakwood Drive, a quiet residential street lined with mature oak trees and well-maintained lawns. The house had 3 bedrooms, a large backyard where the children could play, and most importantly, it was 15 miles away from David's apartment. But distance meant nothing to a man consumed by obsession. David's harassment began subtly, as it always did with him: phone calls at odd hours that he would hang up when Rachel answered, gifts left on her car windshield at work, flowers that seemed romantic to observers but felt like threats to Rachel, who recognized them as the same roses he used to bring home after particularly violent episodes during their marriage. The escalation was gradual but relentless. David began showing up at places where Rachel took the children. When Sophia had a soccer game on Saturday mornings, he would park across the street from the field, watching through binoculars. When Rachel took Carlos to the library for the summer reading program, David would be sitting in the coffee shop next door, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping his eyes fixed on them. Rachel documented everything. She took photographs of the gifts, saved the voicemails where David's breathing was audible, but he never spoke, and kept a detailed journal of every sighting. When she brought this evidence to the police, Officer Patricia Hendricks listened sympathetically, but explained the limitations of the law. "He has not technically violated the restraining order." Officer Hendricks explained, "Being in public spaces is not illegal. even if his presence makes you uncomfortable. We need him to make direct contact or explicit threats before we can take action. The explicit threats came soon enough. On a Tuesday evening in September, Rachel was getting the children ready for bed when her phone rang. The caller identification showed David's number, which should have been blocked by her service provider. When she answered, his voice was different than she had ever heard it. Calm, measured, and terrifyingly certain. "I know Antonio stays over on weeknights now," David said. "I know he drives the blue Ford pickup truck. I know Sophia lost her first tooth last week, and Carlos started taking piano lessons. I know everything about your little pretend family, Rachel, and I know exactly how to end it." Before Rachel could respond, the line went dead. She immediately called the police, but when officers arrived at David's apartment 20 minutes later, he was not home. His landlord said he had not seen David in 3 days. A check with his employer revealed that David had called in sick for the entire week, which was unusual for someone who had not missed a single day of work in over 2 years. That night, Antonio installed additional locks on all the doors and windows. He also set up a security camera system that would record anyone approaching the house. Rachel barely slept, jumping at every sound, the wind rattling the windows, the house settling, the neighbor's cat knocking over a trash can. For 6 days, there was no sign of David. Rachel began to hope that maybe he had finally given up. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe the threat had been just another attempt to frighten her. She should have known better. On the following Monday night, October 15th, Rachel was helping Carlos practice piano, while Sophia worked on a school project at the kitchen table. Antonio was in the garage, organizing his tools after a long day at a construction site. The house felt warm and safe, filled with the ordinary sounds of a family going about their evening routines. At exactly 9:27 in the evening, the power went out. Rachel's first thought was that a transformer had blown, a common occurrence during the windy autumn months. But when she looked out the front window, she could see that the neighboring houses still had electricity. Antonio emerged from the garage with a flashlight, his expression immediately alert. "The main breaker has been manually shut off," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm the children. Someone cut the power from outside. Before Rachel could respond, they heard the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Antonio grabbed his cell phone to call 911 while Rachel ushered the children into the hall bathroom, the most interior room in the house. She locked the door and held both Sophia and Carlos close, whispering that everything would be okay while her heart hammered against her ribs. The sound of footsteps moving through the house was unmistakable. Heavy boots on the hardwood floors, moving with purpose from room to room. David was not trying to hide his presence. He wanted them to know he was there, wanted them to be afraid. "Rachel," David's voice boomed through the house. "Bring my children out here now. We are going to have a family conversation." Through the bathroom door, Rachel could hear Antonio's voice, steady and calm, talking to the 911 dispatcher, but she also heard something else. David's footsteps had stopped moving. The house had gone completely silent. Then came the sound that would haunt her dreams for months afterward. David's laughter, low and menacing, echoing through the hallway. "I know where you are hiding," he called out. "I know this house better than you think. I have been watching, learning, planning. There is nowhere you can go that I will not find you." The doorknob to the bathroom rattled. The attack that followed was swift and brutal. David had come prepared with tools from his security job, a crowbar to break down doors, zip ties to restrain his victims, and a knife that he had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. When he forced open the bathroom door, Rachel threw herself between David and her children, screaming for them to run. But there was nowhere to go. David struck her across the face with the back of his hand, sending her crashing into the bathroom wall. Sophia and Carlos clung to each other in the corner, too terrified to make a sound. David looked at them with eyes that Rachel no longer recognized, cold, empty, filled with a rage that had consumed whatever humanity he once possessed. "You turned my own children against me," he snarled at Rachel. "You replaced me with that immigrant. You destroyed our family. Now I am going to destroy yours." Antonio burst into the bathroom just as David raised the knife. The two men collided with tremendous force, crashing into the narrow space between the sink and the bathtub. Antonio was younger and stronger, but David had the advantage of surprise and desperation. The fight was vicious and chaotic. Rachel grabbed the children and tried to shield them from the violence. But in the small bathroom, there was no escape from the horror unfolding before them. The men grappled for control of the knife, their bodies slamming against the walls and fixtures. Blood splattered across the white tile walls. Rachel could not tell if it belonged to Antonio or David, or both. She heard sirens in the distance, but they seemed impossibly far away. Then David broke free from Antonio's grip and turned toward Rachel and the children, with the knife raised above his head. His face was a mask of pure hatred, twisted into an expression of someone who had abandoned all reason and humanity. What happened next defied all logic and would puzzle investigators for 18 months. As David lunged forward with the knife, the bathroom ceiling suddenly collapsed. A massive section of plaster and wooden beams crashed down directly onto David, pinning him to the floor and knocking the weapon from his hand. The collapse was so precise, so perfectly timed, that it seemed impossible to be mere coincidence. But that was not the end of the miraculous interventions that night. When the first police officers arrived at the scene, they found David unconscious beneath the debris, alive, but seriously injured. Antonio had suffered multiple stab wounds but would survive. Rachel had a concussion and several broken ribs from being thrown against the wall. Sophia and Carlos were physically unharmed, but deeply traumatized. The mystery deepened when investigators began examining the scene. The ceiling collapse should not have happened. The house was only 12 years old, built to modern safety standards. There had been no structural damage, no water leaks, no reason for that particular section of ceiling to fail at that exact moment. For 18 months, the case file remained open, with unanswered questions. David was convicted of attempted murder, assault and breaking and entering. He received a sentence of 25 years to life, but the question of how the ceiling collapsed continued to puzzle everyone involved. The answer came when Detective Rodriguez was reviewing the case files one final time before archiving them. Hidden in a stack of photographs from the crime scene, he found something that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. In the corner of one photograph, barely visible in the shadows, was the corner of a ladder leaning against the outside wall of the house. The ladder belonged to Antonio's construction crew, and it had been positioned directly below the bathroom window. Further investigation revealed the truth that seemed too incredible to believe. Earlier that evening, while organizing his tools in the garage, Antonio had noticed a small water stain on the bathroom ceiling. Being a construction professional, he had climbed up to the attic space to investigate what he assumed was a minor plumbing leak. What he found instead were signs that someone had been accessing the attic from outside the house. Insulation had been disturbed, and there were footprints in the dust. Evidence that David had been using the attic space to spy on the family for weeks. Antonio had not mentioned this discovery to Rachel because he did not want to frighten her. Instead, he had quietly begun reinforcing the ceiling joists in the bathroom, planning to complete the work over the weekend when the children were at school. But in his haste to respond to the emergency that night, Antonio had left his tools scattered in the attic space above the bathroom. When the violent struggle began below, the vibrations caused a heavy toolbox to shift position on the temporary support beam Antonio had installed earlier that day. The toolbox fell onto the reinforced section of ceiling at the precise moment David was attacking the family. The impact caused the carefully calculated structural modification to fail in exactly the way Antonio had designed it to fail, if the ceiling ever needed to be safely demolished. In other words, Antonio's construction expertise and his preparation for a home improvement project had created a perfectly timed safety mechanism that saved their lives. But even this explanation did not account for the most miraculous aspect of that night, the timing. For the ceiling to collapse at the exact moment when David was attacking, when Rachel and the children were positioned safely away from the falling debris, when Antonio was close enough to grab the children and pull them to safety. The odds were astronomical. The road to recovery was long and difficult for the Martinez-Valdez family, as they had legally become after Rachel and Antonio married 6 months after the attack. The physical wounds healed relatively quickly, but the emotional trauma took much longer to address. Sophia suffered from nightmares for over a year. She would wake up screaming, convinced that her father was in the house, coming to hurt them again. Rachel found a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, and slowly, patiently, Sophia began to process what had happened to her family. Carlos became withdrawn and started having trouble in school. His grades dropped, and he stopped participating in activities he had previously enjoyed. It took time for him to trust that they were truly safe, that David could not hurt them anymore. Rachel struggled with guilt, wondering if she should have seen the signs earlier, if she should have done more to protect her children. The therapist helped her understand that she was not responsible for David's choices, that she had done everything possible to keep her family safe. Antonio's recovery was complicated by the severity of his injuries. He had been stabbed multiple times and required several surgeries to repair the damage, but his construction business partners rallied around the family, ensuring that medical bills were covered, and that Antonio could return to work when he was ready. The family moved to a new house, in a different city, wanting a fresh start away from the memories of Oakwood Drive. They chose a community with excellent schools and a strong support network for families who had experienced trauma. David Fletcher was denied parole at his first hearing and will remain in prison for at least another 15 years. He has never expressed remorse for his actions or acknowledged the harm he caused to his children. Rachel has made peace with the fact that Sophia and Carlos may never have a relationship with their biological father. The most remarkable change in the family came from their decision to help other families facing similar situations. Rachel began volunteering with a domestic violence advocacy group, using her experience as a nurse and a survivor to help other women escape abusive relationships. Antonio started a non-profit organization that provides free home security installations for families fleeing domestic violence. He trains other construction workers to recognize signs of stalking and harassment, teaching them how to make homes safer for vulnerable families. Sophia, now a teenager, speaks at school assemblies about the importance of reporting signs of abuse. She has become an advocate for other children who have witnessed domestic violence, showing them that survival is possible and that they are not defined by their trauma. Carlos has channeled his experience into a passion for criminal justice. He plans to study law and eventually work as a prosecutor, specializing in domestic violence cases. He wants to ensure that other families receive the protection and justice that his family was fortunate enough to receive. The family has learned that miracles come in many forms. Sometimes they arrive as last-minute interventions that defy logical explanation. Sometimes they appear as the everyday kindness of friends, neighbors, and strangers who choose to help when help is needed most. But perhaps the greatest miracle of all was their decision to transform their trauma into a source of strength and purpose. They refused to let David's violence define their future. Instead, they chose to build a life focused on healing, helping others, and creating the kind of family that David's anger and hatred could never destroy. Years later, when people ask Rachel how she found the courage to leave an abusive marriage and rebuild her life, she always gives the same answer. I realized that staying was more dangerous than leaving. My children deserve to see what real love looked like, what a healthy family could be. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you deserve better. The security cameras that Antonio installed in their new home have never captured anything more threatening than neighborhood cats and delivery drivers. But the family keeps them running anyway, not out of fear, but as a reminder of how far they have come and how much they have overcome. On quiet evenings, when the children are doing homework and Antonio is reading in his favorite chair, Rachel sometimes reflects on that terrible night when their world nearly ended. She thinks about the impossible timing of events that saved their lives, the precise sequence of coincidences that allowed them to survive when survival seemed impossible. She has never been a particularly religious person, but she cannot shake the feeling that they were protected by something beyond their own strength and preparation. Whether that protection came from divine intervention, incredible luck, or simply the power of love and determination, she may never know. What she does know is that they were given a second chance at life, and they have chosen to make the most of it. The Martinez-Valdez family's journey from terror to triumph reminds us that even in our darkest moments, hope and healing are possible. Their decision to transform trauma into purpose has helped countless other families escape similar situations and rebuild their lives. If this account has moved you, or if you know someone who might benefit from hearing stories of survival and resilience, please consider sharing this video with them. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light, showing that no matter how desperate circumstances may seem, there is always a path forward. Make sure to subscribe to True Crime Seat for more incredible stories of survival, justice, and the remarkable strength of the human spirit. Ring the notification bell so you will not miss any of our upcoming episodes. And let us know in the comments below what other types of survival stories you would like us to explore. Remember, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline provides confidential support 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone, and you deserve to be safe. Until next time, stay safe and never give up hope.